Hello, I'm Bob Toomey. Welcome to the State House Report. With me today is Senator John Keenan. John, thanks for coming back.
Thank you. Great
Nice
to be
see
here.
you.
Yeah.
It's a little busy schedule for both of us with children and whatnot. It's school vacation week, so. But John, I'm really excited that you're here, and we have a lot of local matters that people are discussing in Abington. Can you give us some updates on?
Sure. We've been working closely on a few of them. The Abington Public Schools have filed with the School Building Authority an application to basically look at the idea of a co-located combined middle school and high school, which would be on roughly the same, in the same area that the high school is now. Okay. So that's in the process, and School Building Authority will do what they have to do on that, and Abington's been forthcoming with all the information that the School Building Authority is looking for. So it takes a little time, but it's great to see that in the works.
Do you know if they're saying 7th through 12th, what do they have like a dividing wall or something?
Yeah,
how do they try to, do they try to keep them separate?
Well, it's co-located, and it means different things. In Rockland, for instance, where they did it, they have what they call a main street. And the middle school, the Rogers Middle School, is on one side and the high school is on the other side, and there's a main street that goes down the middle. And that's kind of the dividing line. There's some classrooms that are on both. So maybe they're arts or things like that.
Sure.
They're on both. So there's different ways of doing it. Originally there had been a lot of hesitation across the state, for instance, about mixing middle school with high school, but architecturally they're now able to come up with ways to keep them separate, right, and yet to get the benefits from construction costs, savings, and things like that, that they can combine them. So it'll be exciting. Again, it is a process, but it's good to see that process moving along. The School Building Authority has leveraged money to a great extent that all these schools are getting built. They're using model school programs. They're really using the money wisely, and it's been great for the communities.
No doubt about it, especially if they're paying at, what, close to 50%?
Yes, and then they give you additional credit if it's a green school. If you do other things, you can see that reimbursement percentage go up. And what the School Building Authority has done very well is they don't make you wait for the money. Previously, you used to have to wait for reimbursement from the state for quite some time. School systems would front the money, do the construction, and then be put on a payback schedule. School Building Authority really has done away with that. Good. And work hand in hand with the local school districts.
That's a lot of money to be fronting for a small town.
Sure, and it just wasn't working. So now they use a designated revenue stream, and it's really working well for the communities.
I'm glad to hear that. I know Sean Riley is, I think, the chairman of that committee locally, and he has a website. And I apologize, I don't have it in front of me, but I know there is a website. And if you go to the AbingtonPublicSchools.org or something, you could probably find it, because I know Sean had mentioned maybe at the end of 2014, if the time schedule works as expected, there may be a vote on it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's so many different steps
Exactly.
that are involved in the process. Some schools are struggling to get into that process.
Sure.
So Abington is doing well in advancing the project.
Good. But Route 18?
Route 18 still in design stages. That's going to be a big project. Obviously, it ties into what's going on in Southfield, or what's not going on right now in Southfield. That I think will, I think I'm optimistic that something will happen at Southfield. But yeah, the Route 18 is, it'll be a big project. I think it'll be a great benefit to people on the southern end of Route 18. It should ease some of the traffic congestion that's there in the mornings and the afternoons. So that's a project. It's a big project. It's one that'll be funded with state dollars. We try to provide as much financial resources as we can for projects like that are going to benefit local communities.
Sure.
Through our transportation bond bills and through our other funding mechanisms. So that'll be a project that, again, will take some time, but it is progressing. And it does tie into what will happen at Southfield. As you know, some of the details of what's going to happen there are still being worked out. Abington, Rockland, and Weymouth obviously have seats at the table because they're the three communities that will be impacted that abut it. Weymouth is the largest stakeholder, so to speak, but I represent Rockland and Abington, and I've made it clear that Weymouth or no other community will steamroll Abington and Rockland.
Right.
Everybody will go to the table together. Everybody has shared interest. And while right now there's a little bit of dancing going on, meaning some people want this, some people want that. I think there's enough room ultimately that a good proposal will emerge. And I think not one of the towns will be thrilled with it, and not one of the towns will be totally upset with it. I think it'll be a compromise that works for all three towns.
Right.
And I think we just have to wait for the bell to go off, so to speak, for everybody to get at the table and to reach that
I know
agreement.
Lennar's no longer with the project, right? That's
Yes, yeah, when
By
I
the
sold it
boards.
to Starwood, Starwood bought a big portfolio, and part of that portfolio was Southfield. And they are indicating that they're committed to making the project work. The biggest issue there is water and wastewater. You're talking between $30 and $40 million to address that issue. So how can you fund that? Without that, the project will advance slightly, but then anything similar to what was contemplated won't be able to go forward without that being resolved. And then there's the issue of finishing the connector all the way over to Route 18, for instance, and that's critical to having the project work. So those things have to be worked out. But they're not talking about any greater number of units. They're not talking about any greater amount of square footage commercial on the site. It's just staging of it, phasing it, and how to best do that.
okay. Like that's the three main issues that I'm aware of facing
Right.
us on your level. What's going on at the State House?
Quite a bit. If anybody's reading the newspapers these days, they know there's an awful lot going on. And there's an interesting thread to it all, I think. You know, obviously in the newspapers there's talk about what's going on in DCF and the tragic situation that occurred up in Fitchburg. They're exploring the situation that occurred down in Yarmouth, although I think that was less of a DCF issue.
Right.
But
Sounds like more genetics than anything.
yeah, I mean, unfortunately, you know, the mother was addicted to drugs at the time that she gave birth to this child. The child ultimately ended up with an aunt
Right.
and passed away. The autopsy results, as far as I know, aren't back yet. But when I go back to it, you know, the underlying cause there is substance abuse. And in so many cases where DCF is involved, that's the issue. We tend to look at substance abuse and mental health issues. What can we do in that field, mental health and substance abuse? And we forget the impact that mental health and substance abuse have on the court systems, have on our education system, and have on our departments such as Department of Children and Families.
Right.
It is a big issue. In that mix, we have Department of Public Health trying to deal with the medical marijuana situation. So there's an awful lot going on, and it's fascinating to see how it all seems to come back to issues involving mental health and substance abuse.
Sure. So I'm sure most of you know, our watchers know, John was most instrumental in helping get new legislation passed, particularly about prescription drugs. And it's very important because a lot of the people that would become addicted, or at least were abusing it, were literally taken out of their parents' cabinets. It wasn't the street corner drug dealer.
Right. You know, historically, it was always an addict in the inner city that ended up on heroin. And increasingly, it is children, teenagers, adults, who are prescribed prescription painkillers for legitimate injuries and illnesses, and they find themselves dependent and ultimately addicted. There's been a lot of press recently about what's going on up in Vermont.
I'm not familiar with that.
Beautiful Vermont. They have a raging heroin epidemic
Wow.
up there. In a town called St. Albans, which is this picturesque community, they have just an incredible heroin problem. And it's because heroin can be brought cheaply in the cities to the south, meaning here in Massachusetts and down in New York, and they can sell it at a premium up in Vermont, even though the price up there is dropping. But Maine has an enormous problem with prescription painkillers, and ultimately that leads to heroin. And of course here in Massachusetts, and unfortunately in the district that I represent, it's a big problem. So we were successful in getting that legislation passed last session, and we're starting to see some of the impacts of that, positive impacts. Doctors are using the prescription monitoring program
Great.
more frequently. In fact, there was an editorial that I read from some other state where they referenced, that the key to part of this is physicians using these prescription monitoring programs like what's required in Massachusetts. So
Great.
what we've done is becoming a bit of a national model. There's also a group that's meeting as a result of the legislation. We called for a best practices group to meet and come up with some prescribing protocols. And they're finishing up their work. And I think that will be one of the most valuable things to come out of that legislation. They will talk about limiting perhaps dosages by milligram, or what emergency departments can do. And there's been a whole group of people, physicians and others, at the table working on that. That'll be another positive result of the legislation. And we have some more legislation that we've filed. Yes, since that's pending in this session. One of the things that's occurred, everybody's familiar with OxyContin, unfortunately. Back in 1998, that hit the market, and addiction immediately followed, and then from OxyContin to heroin.
Right.
Opiate deaths went like this, unfortunately. So what Purdue did after a lot of pressure after litigation, Purdue made OxyContin tamper-proof, meaning you couldn't crush it, you couldn't melt it, which is what people were doing. They were
Okay.
crushing it and snorting it,
Right.
melting it and injecting it, and getting the same high that they would get off of heroin.
Yeah.
So Purdue Pharmaceutical, in response to some pressure, made OxyContin tamper-resistant. It's driven up the price on the streets
Sure.
for that drug, but you know, it's worked as far as, you know, people getting quick highs off of it. So it's been successful. Incredibly, the FDA has just approved a very powerful hydrocodone painkiller. OxyContin comes from the oxycodone family. Hydrocodone is the other side of the street, so to speak.
Right.
Vicodin
I was
is,
just
for
going to say
instance, on it.
Vicodin as opposed to Percocet.
Well, they approved a very powerful hydrocodone and did not make it tamper-resistant.
So we're starting all over
So we're
again.
starting all over. So we filed, anticipating that, we had met with legislators at the federal level, Congressman Keating, Congressman Lynch, then Congressman Markey, Congressman Capuano, you know, saying, we'll do what we can at state level. You know, can you do something on the federal level?
Right.
And I'll tell you, they have absolutely run with it.
Great.
Congressman Keating has done a great job on it, Congressman Lynch, all the members of Congress, Senator Markey still involved in it. They filed legislation called the STOP Act. It has bipartisan support in Washington, and that would limit non-tamper resistant drugs from hitting the market. But here at the state level, what we did was we filed legislation saying if a painkiller is prescribed and is not tamper resistant, the pharmacist has to substitute one that is tamper resistant. There aren't a whole lot out there
I
right
was
now.
going to say it, right. I'm not familiar with
So
that.
there won't be a whole lot of cost at the outset, but we're hopeful, one, that as they become available, the pharmacist will be required to substitute them. They'll be tamper-proof, or at least tamper-resistant. And two, we're hopeful, and this is an issue that's been identified at the federal level, that it will spur manufacturers into producing tamper-resistant painkillers.
Right.
And you know, we're hopeful that legislation will move this session. We'll see. We've also got have some legislation that's pending relative to sober homes.
Okay.
Sober homes are homes that when people get done with detox and maybe they've gone through a step-down program or a 30-day inpatient program and they need a structured environment to keep them on the path to sobriety, they go to a sober home. Most of them are run pretty well. There are some that aren't all that sober,
Sure.
and my opinion is that the people who choose to live there are then preyed upon by people who are looking to sell them drugs and get them back on that path. So we're looking, well, we filed legislation that would basically provide for an accreditation of sober homes. Can't regulate them under federal law,
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh.
but it would provide for an accreditation
Sure.
so that a family member that brings somebody to a sober home will know at least they've met some basic standards. That's a
Right.
safe environment, a clean environment, and a sober environment for their loved one. And the way we're going to do it as well is if the state is referring somebody to one of these homes, it has to be accredited.
Makes sense.
And you know, we fund different programs, but sober homes are kind of out there by themselves. So the sober homes will be subject to an accreditation process, and they will only get tenants, whether it's from the probation departments, parole, or after somebody's finished their sentence in a jail, or somebody's coming out of a state-run treatment facility, they will go to an accredited sober home. They'll feel comfortable that that's
Right, and
the
you can
situation.
base that maybe on incidents reported over the next year or so, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly, yes. You know, they'll have to provide a list of police calls to their location in order to get accredited and
Sure.
things of that nature.
Because like you said, they're easy prey. And because there are
Right.
some people that are doing it just for the money. Yeah, they rent
Right.
out these rooms. It's a sober house. And yet the guy next door, they're going down the gin mill and bringing back bottles of booze. And
Right, whatever the case may be.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. I'm glad that's moving forward.
Yes, we're keeping our fingers crossed that all these will pop in the next few months. And we have the other one that's come up, and it's been a little quiet lately, but it was a lot going on with it a few months ago, are these synthetic cannabinoids, synthetic marijuana. Bath salts was one of them.
Oh, okay, yes.
Things of that nature. Now, bath salts, we legislated and we banned them, but it took 2 years.
Wow.
It takes a legislative process. So we did a lot of research, and we found that a lot of states try to address this situation that way. But you ban bath salts, the chemist come out with something
Right.
slightly different the next day.
Sure.
That's legal.
Right. It's by definition, it's legal. So
Exactly. They're rather ingenious.
Yeah.
And so you ban this, they come out with something new. You ban that, they come out with something else. So a lot of states have found it difficult to keep up.
Sure.
So what we've done with legislation that we filed is to treat it as a, and I know this simplifies it, but like a bad head of lettuce at a supermarket. You know, if a supermarket sells a bad head of lettuce and somebody gets sick, the local health department is notified, the State Department of Public Health is notified, and it's taken off the shelf. And if there's an issue, you know, it's addressed as far as recalls, but it's taken off the shelf.
Right.
So the way we're going to approach, we want to approach these issues of things like bath salts, is if a local health authority, local police department gets word that, you know what, 2 kids ended up in a hospital this weekend, a South Shore or whatever, and they both took this substance, they will have the authority to contact the state, or the ability to contact the state, and the Commissioner of Public Health will have the authority to say, off the shelves it comes. We schedule it, and then there's a whole
Hearing
review process.
right.
But it gets it off the shelf.
Perfect.
And that will send a message to the manufacturers of these substances, don't even bother with Massachusetts.
Right.
Because you know, that's been the rage in other parts of the country. We've avoided it somewhat here, and I think because we've got other substances that are available.
Right.
But as we, you know, hopefully get those under control, there'll be a market, and we're trying to prevent these things from becoming marketable.
Sure.
There's bath salts, there's Scooby snacks, and they look like the little Scooby snacks that you'd get
They give your kid?
a kid. And they all are careful enough to say on it, not for human consumption, but they know when they sell what's
Oh,
happening.
no doubt about it. Right.
So we'll get it off the shelf. And if they don't take it off the shelf under the legislation, they'll be subject to losing their license to operate their convenience store or gas station.
Sure. So they'd be wise, of course, just to bring it elsewhere, but
Yeah.
why bother with Massachusetts?
Stay out of
like you said?
Massachusetts, and then
Right.
hopefully as other states look at this and they adopt it,
Right, they'll pick up the ball.
then we'll have an ability to kind of combat this.
Good. And you touched on it earlier about the medical marijuana. I know there's been some issues about that. I read a story today about the vetting process, how, you know, they have the state hired a security company to do a vetting process. I
Right.
don't know if you're familiar with that.
I am. It's yeah, I was opposed to medical
I remember-
marijuana.
right.
There's a role for it in the field of medical care, but this is just something way beyond that. And so the Department of Public Health had a bad law to deal with. The law that was passed was so poorly written, it's full of loopholes. And the Department of Public Health then was responsible for putting regulations in place. They did the best they could. They came up with what are recognized as some of the best regulations in the country. And now they're in the process of granting licenses, and they've put out provisional licenses. But they had to review all these applications, and you know, there were some instances where some of that review didn't go as the department had hoped or as others had hoped, and they're circling back on those. You know, there's some issues in Boston where some elected officials saying, you know, I didn't know they were going to put it in this location. I wouldn't have agreed if they were.
Right.
There's some instances where somebody was originally listed as a member of the board of directors, and then knowing that person's background, they were taken off because they wouldn't have passed a background.
Right. And yet he still financed the operation.
Right. So, so the Department of Public Health is circling back on all of that. They're taking another look at it, and you know, they're going to continue to work to try to get it right. What we have to realize, you know, again, I was opposed to this. You could see these problems, but you know, we're taking what has been an illegal market, an illegal substance, an illegal situation, and we're making it legal to some degree. So there's going to be a lot of problems in the course of doing that.
Sure.
But it's incumbent upon us to make sure we get it right. I think it's a precursor to the legalization of marijuana. I think it's people who see the legalization of marijuana coming and know that if they can get their foot in the door here, then the rewards down the road will be
No doubt
enormous.
about it.
My son goes to school out in the Midwest in Milwaukee at Marquette University. And when we were out there, we went to Miller Brewing Company. I went to the Miller Brewing Company for the tour.
Sure.
And when Prohibition hit, Miller Brewing Company was a small local brewery. But they stayed open during Prohibition, brewing root beer, soft drinks, so they kept their operation going.
Right.
And when Prohibition was lifted, boom, they were first ones out of the gate, and they've become the national and international brewer
made
that
Milwaukee
they are.
famous.
Exactly. And you know, I think that people who are involved in medical marijuana, this is just my opinion, they see that happening, they see that as an opportunity. And not all of them.
No.
I think some people are driven for right reasons, but there are some who this is a step in the progress towards legalization, and
And they want to be the supplier.
they want to get out front.
Sure, makes sense. It's a natural business mind as opposed to medical reasons. It's
Right.
business reasons.
I had a lot of people in my office over the course of 2 years as this question was on the ballot and everything, and I did not once hear somebody mention a patient.
Right.
It was customer,
Right.
market surveys. They're
What about
expecting,
glaucoma or something?
yeah, I mean, they're expecting a market, saturation of this much, and they hope to double it in 2 years, and this is what they expect. So there's all kinds of things
You're
going
right.
on.
The writing's on the wall there
Yeah,
for them.
state's working very hard on it. It's a very tough process, and I'd like to do some changes to the medical marijuana law. I don't know if there's support for those. I'd like to ban home cultivation, for instance, because the regulations require that there has to be access for everybody. So why do you have to grow it? And home cultivation presents problems with landlords. What are their rights?
Right.
What are other tenants' rights in apartment buildings? What are neighbors' rights if they see things going on?
Sure.
A lot of issues that, how can you guarantee the quality of what's being grown? All kinds of things.
Right.
So I'd just as soon seen the home cultivation go away. I don't know if there's support for that, but we're gonna keep looking
We'll
at
know
that.
soon enough, right?
We shall see.
Okay, now with the drug issues has been a big thing. What other legislation or any other?
Yeah, it's that the budget's been filed by the governor,
Okay.
which is the first step in the budget process. He files his budget. This year it's called House 2. And everybody looks at the governor's budget to get a sense of what his priorities are and what he wants to do within his agencies. Any new initiatives, which there aren't really many in this budget. And then the House and Senate go about the business of preparing their budgets. So the governor's budget's here, House prepares their budget, Senate prepares its budget, House will act on its budget, Senate will act on its budget. There'll be differences. They meet, they iron out those differences, and then ultimately it goes to the governor for his action, which may include vetoes, messages back to the body asking us to relook at something,
Sure.
or approval of the budget. So that process is underway. It starts in February with the governor's filing, and it ends basically on June 30th, or hopefully before.
So the new fiscal year will start July 1st.
New
Is that
fiscal year starts
hopefully with the
July
new
1st.
budget.
Right.
All right.
And the state's doing pretty well. Their revenues in the last quarter of 2013 calendar year looked pretty good. The state's growth in December in particular outpaced growth nationwide.
Great.
Jobs are being created, but there's always a lag between that and revenues to support some of the things that we want to do, whether it's in mental health, substance abuse, caring for children who can't care for themselves, helping with seniors, veterans.
Sure.
All those things cost money. But revenues in general are up, but the cost of providing services are up. And we're still sorting through the health care issue and all the costs associated with that as we transition into the Affordable Care Act. So there's a lot of cost issues involved with that eat up a lot of the new revenue.
What about the MBCR, Mass Bay Commuter Rail? Are they going to implement the weekend service yet?
Well, that's something we're looking at. We passed in the legislature, we passed a gas tax. We had a comprehensive transportation plan. The governor had submitted a very expensive plan. The legislature, the House scaled back. The Senate didn't go quite as far back as the House. But ultimately, about an $800 million per year commitment was made to its transportation infrastructure. Things such as restoring service cuts, making sure the rails, the actual rails themselves, which have been a problem on that line,
Right.
are in good working order. We will be getting new red line cars, new orange line cars. It helps with things such as Route 18 and all of that. We took a little heat for voting the gas tax, which helped support that transportation plan, and we indexed that gas tax to a rate of inflation. We took a little heat for that. But when I look at my district, I have 5 red line stations, I think it is, commuter rail stations, the ride, an extensive bus network. We've got Route 3, Route 18, Route 58, Route 53. As somebody in the Senate said to me, I know why you'd vote for this. Your district gets everything out of it. We have a lot of transportation
Sure.
needs here, and you can see how important they are to Southfield, to
Oh, no doubt
Abington,
about it.
to all the communities. So, we've appropriated the funds for that, and hopefully it will have a positive impact on commuter rail and the amount of service that's provided, making sure that it's current. So it's a pretty big undertaking, but you have to invest in your infrastructure.
Right.
And we took, as I say, a lot of heat for indexing it to inflation, but I was a local official for 9 years on the city council in Quincy, and I served as the chair of the finance committee. And every year we used to wait and wait for the state to make a decision on Chapter 90 money, which is used for roads. We'd wait for them to make the decision. Ultimately, they'd tell us what they were doing late in the process, and then they'd say, basically, you're getting the same money you got last year. Well, the road that cost us $100,000 last year costs us $103,000 this year.
Sure.
So now we can't do what we really have to do.
Right.
And we had in Quincy a pavement management plan that charted out what we wanted to do to keep up with our roads over the course of 5, 10, 15, and 20 years. A great plan, wise way to do it. Most communities have those type of plans, but we couldn't adhere to it because each year inflation would chip away on our ability
Right.
to do
And
something.
you know the revenue you'd have.
Right, we
Yeah.
kept falling further back. So whether it's private business or public, the public business, having a predictable revenue stream means that you can plan better, which means you can spend money more efficiently and more wisely. So taking a little hit on the vote,
Sure.
but I think it was a good vote, and I would take it again. I think it makes good business sense to have a predictable revenue stream for something as important to residents and businesses as transportation infrastructure.
Right, you can't get to work if we don't, many of us don't have vehicles.
I had one gentleman call me, and I answer all the calls, and he said, I don't want to pay for the gas tax. He said, but what you can do is, why don't you put a bridge on top of the expressway to increase capacity? I said, well, how do we pay for it?
Right.
So there's always that balance of, are we spending the right amount, are we getting it? But we're really working at targeting gas tax revenues to roads and bridges and trains, MBTA and commuter rail.
Sure.
There's been some reports that, the money goes in the general fund. It doesn't. It's going to go for transportation infrastructure.
Perfect.
We have red line cars in Quincy that come all the way down to Braintree. When I was a kid, 5th grade, 6th grade, I used to sell newspapers in the Wallaston train station after school. And that train station hasn't been updated in all those years.
Right.
And the same cars, red line cars that were rumbling overhead back then, they're the same ones that are still rumbling
Sure.
overhead now. And they're expensive to maintain. It's very difficult to keep up with them. It's time for new cars.
Time for new cars, right.
And it'll increase some capacity as well.
I understand, too, that state MBTA didn't renew MBCR's contract. There's another player now.
There's another player. So the Department of Transportation and the MBTA are looking at a lot of different ways. And one of the things that will be a positive relative to the funding that will come out of our votes on transportation, where the new cars for the Red Line and Orange Line, there's a requirement that they at least be assembled here in Massachusetts.
Great.
So that will mean
That's
jobs.
great.
It'll
Great
mean jobs here in Massachusetts, rather than shipping them down to Texas or Louisiana, whatever. If we're going to spend the money for needed transportation infrastructure, we're going to keep that money here in the Commonwealth. So it will be jobs for people as well, and that has a positive effect. For every dollar that's invested in transportation, all the studies show you get about $1.50 back in reward by way of investment in additional economic incentive and
Great.
the economy responding to it.
Perfect.
Yeah, so a
Okay,
lot
you
going
hit
on.
the gas tax there. Trying to think any other big issues coming up.
Two other ones.
Oh,
I don't know
sure.
how much we have for
Oh, we have
time.
time? No.
Oh,
let's do it.
okay.
We want the public to hear.
Minimum wage is one that came up, kind of an interesting dynamic. The Senate passed minimum wage, and Senate President Murray said, I want to put this on the table, I want to advance this. There was a growing sense, particularly in the Senate, that we had to address this issue. So minimum wage legislation was passed in the Senate, and it will phase from $8 up to $11 over the course of several years. I think it's by 2016 when it will hit $11. If the minimum wage that was in effect back in 1968 had kept pace with inflation, it would have brought it just about to $11.
Oh, good. Okay.
So when you think of it, people who are working for the minimum wage right now are working for far less than that they were earning as minimum wage workers back in 1968. It has
Right.
far less buying power. And is this thought that it's all just kids? Well, 75% of minimum wage earners are over their teenage years, and a lot of those are two
jobs.
Two jobs. They go to work 9 to 5,
Right.
and they work a second job at minimum wage. You have seniors who have a tough time with just Social Security and a small pension, making ends meeting rent payments or more, health insurance payments. They go back to work and take a minimum wage job,
Right.
and they're really struggling.
No doubt about it.
So we voted for the minimum wage in the Senate, and my feeling was, if somebody's working full time here in the Commonwealth, meaning 40 hours a week for the entire year, they should make more than $16,000. And if they're willing to work for it and get paid a little more, I think that's great. It means that they'll be less dependent on the state for housing vouchers, for food assistance.
Right.
You know, it's a path towards independence.
Exactly.
People who want to work, you know, we should make sure that you can make an honest, you know,
They
and
can
a decent
sustain their
living.
living, right, they
Yeah.
sustain their families.
Otherwise, you know, you hear these stories about some of the large employers. Basically, when you go in for a job, you get the job, and they bring you in, they tell you about the benefits they may offer, and what they do is they say, here's where you can go to apply for housing assistance and for you know, other benefits from the
Right.
state, because we're going to only employ you 19 hours at such and such a wage, so you're going to need these supplements.
Right.
When a company is making billions of dollars, and I think we all probably know who we're
The
talking
major
about,
ones are.
and that's what they're doing with employees, you know, shame on them.
Right.
Purely and simply, if somebody's willing to work, they should be provided with a decent wage.
Right.
So we voted for the minimum wage, and the businesses said, well, we need some relief on unemployment insurance rates. So the Senate passed a comprehensive unemployment
Insurance, yeah.
unemployment insurance package, and the businesses seem to be pretty receptive to it. It adjusts rates, it rewards those employers who keep employees in a stable work
Sure,
environment.
so they're not hitting the insurance.
Exactly.
Right.
Those who are constantly churning employees will pay a little more. So we have balanced the minimum wage, and being sensitive to the needs of small businesses, we've also put in place unemployment insurance reform. So the combination, we think, will have a positive impact on the economy, help small businesses, and also help people.
Right, the
with their
employer as
earnings.
well as the employee.
Right. So we think the combination of those will be good for the Commonwealth.
Great.
So
You have one last, I thought there were two more things you said.
there was the minimum wage, and there was one other one. Now it's escaped me.
Oh, it's all right, I'm sure we'll have some of our callers will call us with it. John, what about that issue? You didn't bring it up.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate it. Obviously, you have your finger on the pulse of what's going on up there. Any big issues that you expect to come up?
I think you're going to see gun control come up.
Okay.
There's been Speaker of the House put together a group to go out and look at the issue of gun control. There's a group of legislators as well that's looking. We've played a role in that. As chair of the Public Health Committee, I've insinuated myself into the process. And you know, I know that Second Amendment rights are you know, very highly valued, and I'm aware of that. But what I'm focusing on is something separate and apart from that. What a lot of people don't know is that across the country, the number of people who die by guns, meaning suicide by gun, far outnumbers the number of people who die being murdered with guns.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's quite an amazing ratio. And here in Massachusetts, it's not quite as dramatic, but in 4 of the last 6 years, more people have committed suicide with gun, have died by suicide with gun, than have been murdered by guns.
I didn't know that.
And it's really it's an alarming stat. So we want to, in this gun control discussion, this debate, make sure that there's some attention given to that. We're looking to have doctors, primary care physicians, be better trained on how to explore issues relative to guns ownership. To have people who offer gun courses. They do a great job. Massachusetts has a good setup that way. That they offer a module in the course of their training. That they offer a module to prospective gun owners, licensees. You know, here are some signs of mental illness. Here's some signs of suicide. And if you see these signs, here are some places that you can call.
Right.
To make gun owners better aware that, geez, my son or my daughter's behavior has changed, and I've got a gun in the house.
Right.
I want to get help, and I want to be able to get some help for my children.
Yeah, they want to be proactive.
Proactive.
Right.
And then if the next thing is that they're getting the help, but I'm still worried with the gun in the house, to provide them, you know, the ability to have a safe on the premises, or if they just want to get it out of the house, to have a safe haven.
Right.
And we're not sure how that would work, but give them the ability to almost just, you know, bring their gun somewhere.
Take me to the police station or something.
Yeah, and some people are hesitant about the police station. Some
Sure.
people like the idea of the police station.
Right.
Gun clubs are saying, you know, we don't think that's a role. One of the other ideas is maybe some of the gun shops.
Sure.
That they can, you know, basically take back the guns for a number of days and then return them to the owner when the crisis has passed.
Sure.
And there's a little better education in the schools relative to signs of suicide. So we think it belongs in the debate over gun control, because again, people are committing suicide by gun at alarming rates, and you don't hear about it.
Right.
Somebody
Right.
commits suicide, you just hear that they committed suicide. You really don't know how they did. And so often it's by gun. And if it's accessible, it's quick,
be used, right?
and it's effective. The studies have shown that the suicidal thought is somewhat fleeting. You have the thought, and generally you get through the thought, and you may not have it again, or if you have it again, you get through it. But there's always a chance to get help with that thought. When there's a gun nearby, it's too quick of a resolution,
Right.
Compared to thinking about how am I going to rig something in the garage with my car, or how am I going to hang myself? And a lot of times hangings people are found before they've killed themselves.
Right.
Or if I take pills, a lot of times people can be brought back.
Might pump their stomach.
Right. So, but a gun is very final and
Right.
very quick. And so if we can get some more awareness in place, we think it'll have an impact.
That's great. Now, anybody wants to comment or have any questions for the senator? What's the best way to reach you?
Best way is to give the office a call, which is 617, I see it on the screen, 722-1494. You don't get, voicemail. You get somebody that will answer the phone. And if I'm there, sometimes I'm picking up the phone. It's the best way. Oftentimes people send us emails, but honestly, some nights we may get 250 emails or 300 emails on a topic, and it's tough to sort out which ones are which. So please call the office. And we have regular office hours. We're down at the senior center frequently, and then we're down there pretty much on a monthly basis. And then we also have office hours at night. We'll hold them at Town Hall, and that's the next one I think is already scheduled. I don't have the date, but we put that in the local newspaper.
Right.
And the other thing, if anybody wants to meet with me on an issue, I know it's difficult to get into Boston. I'm happy to meet at Town Hall with them. I know in Quincy, for instance, I meet at the local library. If somebody says, can I talk to you? I'll say, sure, I'll meet you at 3 o'clock at the local library, or before I go in town, I'll meet you at 8:30 in the morning, or whatever, when the library opens. And so I can come out here to the town and meet with people. We do it pretty frequently, so
Just so you
happy
know,
to do it.
the senator represents Quincy,
Braintree, Abington, Rockland, and Holbrook.
There you go. So he has a big area, but he is willing to make time for you. You just got to let him know.
Absolutely.
Well, again, I can't thank you enough for all
Thank
you've been
you.
doing.
No.
And I really appreciate you taking the time and talking. Again, if you have
Yes.
any questions or problems, please give the senator or his office a call. They'd be more than happy to help you.
Right.
Before we go, I just want people, please remember the Abington Food Pantry. Again, Christmas is over, but they still have a desire to feed people in the neighborhood. Any help you can give them is always appreciated. If you give cash, it's actually like giving $1 is worth like $7. They can buy literally 7 times more food because of the different deals they've arranged with different supermarkets and different food banks. But again, anything is appreciated. They're located on Route 58 Plymouth Street at the St. Bridget's Complex. I also wanted to thank, I understand Sergeant Feeney has returned home from the service. So if you see any service members, current or former, please say thank you for their service and appreciate what they've done for us and what they are doing for us. Any help you can give the community, help your neighbor, pitch in. It's cold, check on your neighbors, some of the elderly in particular. The oil's high, they may not be buying medicine. Just knock on the door or something, knock on the window, make sure your neighbors are healthy and doing well, and if there's a problem, notify the police or any agency you think can help them. It's going to be cold the next couple of weeks, that Arctic vortex or whatever they call it. Yeah. I know Thursday and Friday, I can't think of the dates, 5th or so, it's going to be bitter cold again. So again, keep an eye on your neighbors, help out the food pantry, and help your neighbor. And if you want to talk to people about this show, you can actually tell them they can see this on the computer at abingtoncam.org. If you say, oh, I liked what the senator said, or I talk about the food pantry, you go to that website and you can see this show that was broadcast here. So again, tell your neighbors, help your friends. Thank you very much. I want to thank Justin Shanahan for coming in on his time off to help produce this again. Thank you.